Hello, I'm Dr. Gordon Smith, and welcome to the second element of How to Become a More Effective Teacher, The Art and Neuroscience of Teaching, a course about ADFM. In this element, we'll explore education as a system. By the end of this discussion, you'll be able to define the key attributes of this system and how they relate to one another. When we teach, we are trying to transfer knowledge to the student in such a way that it is retained, in other words durable, and applicable to diverse but relevant situations, in other words transferable. As a teacher, have you ever thought about how students learn? Most of us have never given this question much thought, but it is self-evident that successful teaching must be based on an understanding of how students learn. Education is a system comprised of the teacher, learner, the environment, and of course the knowledge to be transmitted. If one imagines a liquid being poured as an example, the teacher is the pourer, the knowledge the liquid, the vessel the learner, and the funnel the environment. If the pourer pours too quickly, the funnel is too small, the liquid too viscous, or the vessel too small, the process doesn't work. ADFM is not just about the teacher, but about how an effective teacher navigates the system of education. In this element, we will consider each of these components of education and how they relate to form a system. An understanding of these concepts forms the foundation of our exploration of ADFM and its basis. Click on each to learn more. As we saw with the videos of Dr. Polston Samuels, the teacher can be the critical element of successful education and can serve as a motivator, role model, and mentor. Since you are taking this course, you probably also believe, or at least hope, that we can all improve as teachers. Teaching often happens spontaneously, but to be effective, it must always be thoughtfully structured and objective-driven. Before teaching, we must decide how we hope the student will be changed by the encounter. A central concept of ADFM is ongoing assessment. The teacher must assess and interact with students and react to what they learn. It is also helpful for the teacher to understand the basics of learning theory. Recognition that learning is best done in discrete elements which form the building blocks of knowledge is key. Consider this question: do you need to be an expert to be a good teacher? Select your answer and we'll see what others who have taken this course thought. Here is how others responded. Now let's hear what Dr. Samuels has to say about this issue. Press the green play button when you're ready to continue.
I think that the key actually to teaching is knowing. You have to know something before you can teach it. Once you know it really well, it's actually difficult not to want to tell somebody else about it. Almost any subject, if you really know about it very, very well, you're very anxious to tell other people about it. And by learning the subject very deeply yourself, there emerges an organizational scheme from it. And that's the theme that's in my head as I'm talking about it. And of course, in order to do that, you have to yourself become sort of an expert on this subject, because you could oversimplify to the point it isn't real anymore. It isn't realistic. And we've all heard people who are teaching about something they're not expert about. And it's immediately obvious. It's like riding a horse. The horse can tell immediately that this person actually doesn't have a deep understanding of this. This is overly simplified.
While you don't need to be a world expert to teach a subject, it is essential that you have complete expertise with the knowledge model you will teach. Some of the best teachers in our department are our residents, but their model of neurological knowledge is too simple or two-dimensional for them to effectively teach most faculty. On the other hand, they are often much better than inexperienced faculty educators at assessing students' baseline knowledge and learning progress. As Dr. Samuels knew what the ACP internists wanted, residents are often better able to appreciate students' needs and wants. Too often we confuse expertise with teaching. Indeed, content experts sometimes make the worst teachers. The objective of this course is to improve your ability as an expert to teach to naive learners. We will also explore this concept further in Elements 5 and 6, which cover the learning cycle and how elements combine to make a course. Knowledge is a model of the real world. For example, our knowledge of geography is based on maps, which are really a simplified model of the physical structure of the Earth. Our knowledge of the world's geography is informed by the process of building our maps or models. Maps can be displayed in different ways to convey different models of the real world. The translation of the three-dimensional structure of North America into the two-dimensional map with which we are all familiar from grade school is typically done in such a way to emphasize the size of North America. This map of early North America looks very different to us because it was drawn by people who had an incomplete knowledge of the Earth's structure. Maps done by cartographers from different world locations and in different times reflect different models or knowledge systems, although they are based on the same real world. Their knowledge of the Earth was incomplete and flawed. As understanding of geography evolved, so too did the accuracy of the model. Another example that strikes closer to home for neurologists is epilepsy. Epilepsy is a definable disease, but our understanding of its clinical features and pathogenesis, our system of knowledge, is nothing more than a model of a reality that we still incompletely understand. This medieval painting reflects the belief at that time that epilepsy was caused by demonic possession. Here, Jesus is depicted healing an epilepsy patient by exorcising the demon. We of course now know that this model is deeply flawed. With growth in our sophistication and expertise, our model of seizures has evolved. When we teach, we are trying to transfer our model of the real world, our knowledge, to the student. This model will continue to evolve as our understanding of disease mechanism and therapy improves. In order to teach a piece of knowledge, it is therefore critical that the teacher understands the content and is able to break down the knowledge or model into its building blocks or elements. For instance, the liquid in this picture has several elements, including temperature, viscosity, volume, chemical makeup, etc. Transfer of the liquid requires attention to each of these. The same is true of knowledge. Later in this course, we will learn more about the pedagogical process of knowledge transfer. In the same way that knowledge systems have varying degrees of accuracy, they also have varying degrees of depth or complexity. In this sense, knowledge is dimensional in the same way as our map. The simplest knowledge structure is merely a list of attributes, like a bulleted PowerPoint slide. As the knowledge system becomes more complex, its dimensionality increases, much as this map's dimensionality increases with the addition of topographical and eventually dimensional data representing the actual location. We'll return to this theme as we cover the cognitive neuroscience of ADFM. As a teacher, you pay careful attention to the learning environment. Sometimes you have control over the environment and other times you do not. Wherever education is taking place, the teaching must be engaging, and in highly distracting environments, capturing and maintaining the student's attention can be challenging. Teaching methods or pedagogy must adapt to different environments. For example, when teaching in a plenary session at the AAN annual meeting, one uses a different pedagogy, didactic PowerPoint slides, than when teaching one-on-one, where one would almost never use PowerPoint slides. Consider the following question. We recognize pedagogy must differ between learning environments. What is the central characteristic that must vary by learning environment? Click to make your selection. While each of these are important considerations, it is learner assessment that is most important in defining our approach to differing environments. Methods, e.g. didactic form, use of media, may be shared across learning settings, and engagement is essential no matter the environment. It is how we assess and interact with students that drives differential approach to learning setting. Gifted teachers do this intuitively, even in large group settings. Teaching in a remote and asynchronous environment, for example in the online space such as this course, requires conscious attention to assessment. Now that we've covered the components of the educational system, let's think about one aspect of how they integrate. A key advance in learning theory occurred in 1956 with George Miller's publication of The Magic Number 7 ± 2, Some Limits on Our Capacity to Process Information. Miller showed that with rare exceptions, humans are able to process a limited range of new discrete elements of information. We cannot cognitively process more than 7 at any given time. This range or volume became known as a chunk. Miller's work laid the foundation for cognitive load theory, or CLT. CLT posits that we have two types of memory, working and long-term. Working memory, which is the short-term memory we use to initially handle information, can retain about 5 to 9 chunks or elements simultaneously, as Miller suggested. CLT holds that learning is conversion of working into long-term or durable memory, which can retain practically limitless amounts of information but cannot manipulate it as working memory does. Our brain's working memory accesses long-term memories that are essentially constructed of chunks or elements into organized schema for us to use when needed. We will learn a lot more about this process shortly. The term cognitive load refers to the mental effort that a learning task places on the student's working memory. In order for the student to learn a chunk or element, the cognitive load of a particular task must be appropriate or balanced. It needs to be sufficiently complex to be interesting, but not overwhelming. Extraneous environmental contaminants can serve as extraneous load that detracts from the learner's ability to assimilate information. It is therefore necessary to construct the knowledge to be conveyed into digestible learning elements that are of appropriate size and complexity for the intended student. The environment needs to be managed to maximize learning opportunities and minimize distraction. If the information is not engaging, the learner is uninterested, or the information too basic, the load will be insufficient and the learner will be bored. If, on the other hand, the teacher conveys information too complex, overly dimensional knowledge structure, too many elements, or there are too many environmental contaminants, the learner is overwhelmed. Striking the right balance between intrinsic load and shooting for germane load will engage the learner with an appropriate level of challenge. Cognitive chunking is in some ways analogous to a meal. Meals are comprised of individual parts, but not too many, and each part has an acceptable size. If the size is too small, we leave hungry, or too large, we feel sick or can't digest. Considering portion size is important when developing a meal, the same way that considering cognitive chunking is important when teaching. We'll discuss more about structuring these chunks as elements later in the course. We all recognize that each student learns differently. Education is ideally individualized to each student's needs. Features of the learner that are important are too numerous to list here, and you are familiar with most of these attributes, which include baseline understanding, intelligence, attention, cultural background, belief systems, fears, personality, and learning preferences. The learner's interest in the topic, motivation for engaging in the learning opportunity, and past experiences are each important. This may all seem self-evident, but all too often we fail to consider the learner. Think of the last lecture you attended. Did the teacher make any effort to assess your baseline knowledge? How often during a grand rounds covering a complex basic science or clinical topic did the lecturer assess whether the learners had understood the steps so far? As we'll learn later in the course, it is essential to evaluate your student and constantly monitor them. Ongoing assessment is often skipped and must be consciously and sometimes creatively incorporated in distant and asynchronous learning environments such as this one. Think back to Marty Samuel's first video. Even though he was lecturing to a group of several hundred physicians, he considered their baseline knowledge and assessed their progress via his interaction throughout the learning experience. Let's hear what Dr. Pulst has to say about Dr. Samuel's lectures.
He gets the feedback very quickly from the way his audience engages and the answers he gets back. And very often the level on sophistication of the answers to questions, it can tell you a lot of where your audience is coming from. And so I think the feedback mechanism is almost continuous during his lectures.
As we progress through the elements of this course that discuss learning theory and course design, you will encounter a number of instances where ADFM recognizes the importance of understanding your student and how students in general learn material best. By way of review, we have learned that education is a system comprised of learner, teacher, knowledge itself, and the environment. Knowledge is a model of the real world and can vary in complexity and dimensionality. The teacher must engage and assess the learner in an organized way and convey knowledge in discrete chunks. This is because the learner's working memory captures information by chunks or elements but can only handle 5 to 9 at any given time. Environmental influences can either enhance or limit the amount of material the learner can master in any given session, cognitive load. Now we are ready to get to work learning about ADFM. Once you complete the assessment following this element, you will have the opportunity to choose whether to explore the learning theory and cognitive neuroscience underlying ADFM by following the learner path, or to go directly to a series of elements about how to build educational activities using ADFM by following the teacher path. Once you complete the chosen pathway, you'll move on to the other.